is now time for this month's broadcast of Learning Now TV.
Welcome to another Learning Now TV. It's already the end of February. Kate, who have we got on the show today?
Well, after the longest January in history, here we are at the end of February. It's rolled by very, very quickly. So we're joined by some awesome guests today. So Dr. Ashwin Mehta joined me to talk about all things AI. Obviously, the topic du jour. So listen to everything from ethics, governance, like really get it stuck into the detail there. Andy Lancaster joins us, recent winner of the Colin Steed Award, no less, for his services to learning and development. Joins us to talk about his new book, which is very timely on learning communities. Martin Cousins joins us in our research corner to talk about a new report from LinkedIn. Liam Maguire from Christian Aid is talking to Michelle Parry-Slater about their Charity Learning Consortium Community Champion Award. So fantastic to see Martin and everyone at CLC continuing their good work. And of course, it wouldn't be an episode of Learning Now TV without Rob Clark and his news roundup.
Indeed. Kate, thanks very much for that. Enjoy the show, everybody.
LNTV viewers in the UK might recognise our next guest. Dr. Ashwin Mehta has been researching and sharing some awesome insights around AI for at least the last year, if not longer. We've known each other a little while and then keep bumping into each other every time we go somewhere now. And I've been stalking him for a long time for the show. So welcome to Learning Now TV, AI strategist, Dr. Ashwin Mehta.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for having me. And it's going to be an interesting discussion. Let's talk about the vast world of AI and learning.
Yeah, absolutely. So where you sort of, if I can use this phrase, you've like bucketized some of your research into some different streams, right? That kind of relate to L&D.
Yeah, so the traditional paradigm of L&D, whether we're talking about digital learning content or whether we're talking about facilitated learning, regardless of where a company is, you can kind of bucket it into strategies. So what are the business problems that we're trying to solve with skills, with learning, with things like this? And that gives the direction of travel, something that allows us to have measurable success criteria and hopefully over time make a difference. But underneath that, you can pretty much bucket all of the activities that L&D tends to do into a handful of key areas. And those areas are content. So what is the domain knowledge? How do we deliver it? Whether it's e-learning, whether it's simulation, or whether it's PowerPoint or somebody standing up in front of a classroom. That's the content space. And then in the digital learning space, we tend to look at content that sits on an infrastructure. So that infrastructure, we call those platforms. They could be LMSs, LXPs, any flavor of platform we want to talk about. But you have a technical architecture that allows learners to interact with the content. And it could be structured, it could be pathways, it could be just you search for something, it could just be a simple web screen. But learners interacting with content on an architecture then produces data. So we get data about the interaction itself. And that could be the time-stamped completion that we call, SCORM data. All of these things themselves, if we think about strategy and we think about where can we apply ourselves, whether it's technology, whether it's thought processes, whether it's strategic improvements, we can think about content, infrastructure, and data, content platforms and data, depending on the terminology you wish to use. And underlying that, you have things like governance, finance, and supply chain. But each of these areas, if you put sustained thought into these areas, then you can make a difference in your business. And therefore, the way I've been researching it is I've been thinking about each of these areas, not only in a silo, so how does content work, and what are the AI systems that are available to us now, but also how do these things interact with each other. And each of these areas then produces a very rich area for investigation.
I love that. I think that's really a nice breakdown for people watching to kind of make sense of their universe. And then, so what are some of the trends then that you're seeing, or what's most interesting to you about each of those buckets?
So each of them has something interesting in its own right. And in the midst of an AI revolution or evolution, we have the capability in the market to make content very quickly, very rich, lowering the cost base of content production in a way that we haven't really seen this in the past. We kind of touched on it maybe 15, 20 years ago when e-learning authoring tools started to come out, but nothing at the scale that we've seen now. And the interesting thing about that is we have a lot of issues coming out from that. So we have things like ethics and copyright and transparency, and how do we know that something is AI created, and how do we establish that the workforce has the ability to discriminate between what is truth, what is endorsed content, what is fabrication or fiction. So that is a very interesting area in its own right. The platform area is way more stable because platforms have been using traditional AI rather than generative AI for a very long time, using machine learning and various other algorithmic forms of content matching with roles, with demographics. People who watch this also watch that, this kind of Netflix thing. So that's been going on for a long time. But the interesting point about these two things is we're starting to see a little bit of convergence in that space. So platforms are now moving into the space of, well, we have authoring capability in platform. We can link generative AI to what you're seeing in the platform space. We can start to have virtual assistants, and we can think about having our own content propositions. So, the soft skills area is a rich one. Cornerstone has this Immerse that used to be Tailspin. So these are very diverse ways that each of these markets are going, but they're converging a little bit as well. So even some of the content houses are starting to give platform capabilities along with their authoring tools. So that makes it a little bit more difficult for the buyer, the person who is purchasing the systems, to distinguish what the different capabilities are and how those capabilities come together in an ecosystem to try and give a business competitive advantage or to try and shift the needle. So that's interesting in itself. But on the far side, the data side, if you remember I was saying content, infrastructure, data. On the far side of data, we haven't really changed anything about what we do. We still basically look at timestamp completion. So we did have, I'm going to say 2006 or, however many years ago that was, 20 years ago.
I
We had
was
the first, I don't remember it either. We had this first inkling of like XAPI and a different data specification. And that's not been very widely adopted. But now we have the conversation around data being the fuel for the AI engine and how data management and data literacy is way more important. But in the L&D space, we're still doing content, we're still doing platforms, but we haven't really changed our view of data. So very interesting area that is, because we can start to get really detailed behavioral data from most of the AI systems. Anything that you're talking with, you can start to build a picture of how you think, what your sentiment is, what kinds of queries you're putting forward. But we're not there yet in L&D. So I think that's going to be something that we need to get better at.
And I mean, I'm interested in this dynamic between how fast the vendors are going in terms of, to your point, it feels like there's such an arms race around, adding in the AI or augmenting AI that was already there, etc., versus the ability and the permissions of organizations to be able to put this stuff in. Because, I always say if I was running a bank, I would be wanting to improve my effectiveness, improve my efficiencies, reimagine processes. How exciting. But by the same token, I wouldn't want my name on the front of the Wall Street Journal because there's been some sort of AI, I don't know, whatever it is, like mess up, and something's gone horribly wrong. So that kind of there's a push and pull there at the moment, isn't there?
Well, I think there's always been a push and pull between technological innovation and risk appetite with any business, and I don't think that changes now. But I think what does change is that the risks from AI are emerging. So we don't tend to have a good picture at the moment of what those risks could be. We start to see some reputational risks arise as businesses try and deploy some AI, and maybe they get something wrong in their ecosystem. And so there's a risk. Sometimes it's a legal risk. We see this in the copyright space with how some of the foundational models are using voices or actors' likenesses and things like that. So there are emerging risks, but because we don't have a clear picture, it's difficult to do risk management on that basis. But the flip side of that is that innovation, what's the phrase? We're bolting the door after the horse has escaped or something. Yeah. So we all have AI. We have it on our phones. We have it in our lives. People are using it on a daily basis for things that maybe aren't part of their work. And then they come to work and they're told, well, no, you can't do all of that amazing stuff. You just got to operate in this box. So we have this balance of risk appetite and risk management versus innovation. And that's going to be slightly different in nearly every business, I think.
What's the governance around some of this? The vendors have a responsibility to use, maybe it's their own LLM or, how they're powering their AI solutions as well, because that's been I don't know. I can't even say it's been a big area of debate. It's a bit of a black hole, really.
Yeah. I think the first thing that client side, so in-house, if you're working in a business and you're trying to procure some software that is AI capable, the very first thing is around selection. So is it actually an AI capable software? Is it something that's using AI? Is it reskinned ChatGPT, for example? Get under the hood a little bit and figure out what actually you're buying. That's pretty much the first thing. After that, once you have identified the responsible vendor who is using AI in a way that adds value, then that's when it starts to become interesting in terms of governance, because every supplier in the market is going to do a certain amount of governance. And the amount that they do is going to depend on what the technology is and what the architecture is and where their place is in the market and all of these things. But there is an assumption sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes there is an assumption that if I buy a thing and I implement that thing, the supplier's got everything in the bag. They're taking care of governance and it's great and it's fine. But there's always client-side governance that needs to happen. So validating things like security and privacy, where data is held, how it is held, access control, what the AI is actually doing. Are you releasing your company data into a training model? These kinds of things are part of that supplier conversation when you're engaging a supplier. And it's also, it gives you a good handle on selection, because if you've selected a responsible supplier, they will have these answers that will be able to have that conversation with you. Whereas if you're on the other end of the market and you're effectively buying junk tech that doesn't really do anything, that has been cobbled together, that doesn't have any governance around it, it will become apparent during those conversations. So once you've selected a supplier, it's really important to have that governance conversation and figure out, what's the supplier doing? What do I need to do? And to make sure that nothing falls in between.
Just to wrap up, because we could talk about this for a really long time, or we don't have that gift of time today. But what advice would you give to people who are on the buy side, trying to make sense of where the opportunity lies around AI, and how to make these risk assessed kind of decisions and explorations?
So there are a handful of key messages here, which I'll land them all and see if that works, right? So the first obvious one is contact me and we'll have a conversation, right? That's a little bit of an obvious plug. The second thing is get out in the market and play with things and read things. Most software that's kind of AI capable has some kind of trial or some kind of license that you can use in a way that's like a free tier. Play with some of these things and figure out what works for you. And while you're doing that, you'll be reading, you'll be educating yourself, and you'll be figuring out what it is that you need to do. That needs to marry itself with a responsible approach to strategic implementation. And the scary word AI shouldn't deter anybody from thinking, well, all along I was doing tech implementations. I had a strategy. There was a problem I was trying to solve. I had some measurable criteria. I put some governance around it. I appointed some people, some ethics people, some privacy people. I had an operating model. Somebody in the leadership was accountable for this. Then I implemented some tech. I had some data governance. And then I was thinking about culture and skills and making sure that people could use this tech. I didn't mention AI. I just mentioned a fairly generic approach to implementing anything, any kind of change in a business. So without being scared by the word, take responsible steps in line with everything else that you do in the business to try and add value to the business. And if you take all of those steps, then pretty much you're on the right track, and try and seek expert opinion and guidance where you think you might be lacking.
Yeah, and I mean, we're so lucky to, we've got such a great community, and obviously, it's not just UK specific, right? Like this is global, and anybody is just a LinkedIn message or a WhatsApp or what
Absolutely.
have you away. So I'm super excited to see where your research goes. I would love to be able to keep track of that as you step through some of these things, and we're going to hear more stories about AI as 2025 progresses, no doubt. Hopefully being used, in anger to achieve some great results. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, Ash, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you for having me. See you soon.
I have a new book out, Creating Joy at Work, 501 plus ideas for how to create happy workplaces. Check out how to give people trust, make them feel good, and enable freedom within guidelines. Also, how to select managers who are good at managing, and how to celebrate mistakes. There's a PDF at happy.co.uk, or you can check it out on Amazon.
I'm talking to someone who very many people watching this program will see as a very familiar face. It's great to speak to Andy Lancaster again. Andy, welcome to Learning Now TV.
Fantastic to be back. It's been some time actually, but great to
been some time.
Great to be with you and those watching.
Thank you very much indeed. And Andy, you are an author. You've written a book on learning communities, which we're going to highlight on the screen later on. So if you want to go and explore that book, you are the CLO and consultant at Reimagine People Development. And you're a well-known figure in L&D generally, having come from CIPD, head of learning at CIPD. And before that, you've been around a long time in learning and development. But you've had an interesting early career, which we want to touch on, I think, where you weren't in learning and development. So my first question, I think, is a pretty basic one. The book is about learning communities. Why did you choose learning communities? Why do you think they're important?
So I think my interest in learning communities goes back to my time working as head of HR and L&D in a rehab organisation, working with those with challenges with addiction. And in that organisation, there was a theory which was created by a guy called George Leon, which was called community as method. And it was a structured therapeutic approach for helping those to deal with addictions. And what was really interesting for me at the time, I didn't link it to learning at that time, but it positions community as a primary agent of change, a primary agent of promoting personal growth and seeing transformation in life. And whilst the model does have some criticisms in terms of it can be seen as an over rigid model, or it can be a little bit coercive, it just got me thinking at the time that community is a very, very powerful means for transformation. And the core principles behind the model, in terms of you thinking about rehabilitation, was transformation came through shared experiences, and people were autonomous but also accountable with others, working with others. And there was a real sense of role modeling. That's how people saw behavior change and reinforced behavior change. And this kind of very values based that we work together. And we foster those kind of relationships. So it got me thinking, and it then came on to, obviously, while I was at CIPD, I was really getting interested in the back of COVID around human connection. And if we look in the natural world, it's simply the way that animals will transform and will learn, whether it be bees, ants, chimpanzees, starlings, or even massively interesting one around hermit crabs. So this is the way the natural world learns, and it's the way that early mankind and womankind learn, and young children. So for me, it was just a really obvious thing to go and look at. And I think that many of us have tried to leverage communities, but I guess in writing the book, it was to begin to explore why it's sometimes really challenging, and these fragile ecosystems sometimes are difficult for us to run, but when they do run well, they are incredibly powerful.
Yes, I think they are too. And if you look at Vygotsky's research from the 1970s, now he was saying if you're in that zone where you've got contemporaries, people at the same level as you, working together, you solve problems faster, you move faster, you make more progress. So that's all based on the idea that on your own, it's lonely. With other people, you can make progression. And I think I really love that idea that you instinctively pick up the role models in the group. So you almost unconsciously begin to model the best practice.
Yeah.
So can you give me a couple of organizations that have made some progress in this area and how they did it and what the outcomes are?
Yeah, so interesting. It was quite challenging to find case studies for the book, but there are some great ones out there. And incident, since you write the book, then people come out of the woodwork and say, "I've got this really amazing community." So I've found more since. But let's take a couple of examples. Bloomberg, the global financial information and technology company. So if you're not familiar, those listening in, Bloomberg provides real-time data trading platforms through its flagship product called Bloomberg Terminal. Now, what was really interesting, Bloomberg needed to ensure its engineers and its tech staff are at the cutting edge of rapidly evolving digital technologies. So I think this is a really interesting one for all of us trying to maybe stay ahead in digital technologies or AI, that Bloomberg decided to create these communities. And what was really interesting for me, Nigel, they call them guilds, which obviously hat tips back to those ancient guilds where people learned skills together, whether that be stonemasonry or whatever it was. So their communities were based around technical specialisms, domains like programming, C++, machine learning, web development. And what was really interesting for me is they actually designed a really powerful structure. So they had guild leaders. So the people who led the communities were not the learning team, were not the HR team, but those with operational excellence and experience. And they also had what they call guild chairs who sat above those guild leads, who I think played a vital role to connect the community with senior leadership and sponsors. So there was a really smart structure. And together they planned activities, they had external speakers, they had get-togethers and hackathons. And what you found through this model, it really powered operational excellence and cutting-edge practice. Exactly like you said, learning together in that zone of proximal development was where they learned, and they saw better collaboration, they saw better, faster development, they saw improved coding, all those kind of things. So I think the Bloomberg model is a brilliant example for us to think about in our context. Where are the strong operational excellence leads, and how can they be leveraged to create communities which can drive excellence?
Yes, completely agree. Any other examples?
Yeah, the second one is a totally different one, which is based in healthcare. The Health Innovation Network, which works across South London. So obviously, this is a UK-based example, but they had an interesting challenge. And often I think the most powerful communities face a challenge. They're not just kind of tagged on to a management development program. They have what I'd call in my model a cause. So the issue was for them, following some fairly major patient safety reports, they needed a way to improve healthcare, and particularly innovation in healthcare. And they were working across 12 London boroughs or regions, and they had about 60,000 healthcare staff, so a big workforce. So what they did is they created 7 specific communities looking at medication, safety, acute deterioration where people are very ill, maternity, I think it was sepsis and duty of care. And what they did is they wanted to cut through the hierarchy to empower people to quickly, frontline practitioners, to quickly be able to do real-time knowledge sharing. And again, it was just a brilliant example where they not only shared knowledge, but they actually created innovative breakthroughs. So one of them was around a thing called postpartum hemorrhage, which is where women can have excessive bleeding after childbirth. And they actually came up with some brand new thinking around this simply by being in communities. And they noticed, again, a massive cultural shift because they had a collaborative, proactive mindset about working together. So again, for me, there's a great lesson for us in learning that we need to sometimes cut through hierarchy and empower staff right at the front line to be working together to drive collaboration and transformation.
You're right. And also speed, that it accelerates knowledge, so that there's a good idea here suddenly is being implemented right across the organization. And that is quite important in the kind of crazy world we live in at the moment. So thank you.
I think, we've been around this, haven't we? That a program just doesn't do this. It's just sort of saying, I'm going to wait 3 months to get on the next intervention. I mean, but the minute you can plug in, and especially with the technology we have now, you can be in a community or in a collaborative intervention, which helps you. It's just a very, very powerful way of doing things.
I completely agree with you. So if people are listening and going, wow, I like this idea, give them some tips, Andy. Where do you start? In an organization that is focused on individuals, people don't really get together very much apart from in their one team, but they're separated geographically, they're separated by the hierarchy. Where do you begin?
That was exactly the question I started, because I'd run some successful communities, but I'd also had some real failures around this. So I don't want people listening in thinking it was all easy, because it wasn't. So what I did was I looked at where I went and found communities where it was working and just began to study what was going on. And out of that just came some clear evidence about some key things, which are the practical tips to get communities right. And I came up with what I've called 7 C's model. Now, we know we need to be very careful on these models. They are a framework. They're not a panacea. But very quickly, and this is what I covered in organizational learning communities. So that's the one. There's the book, and it ended up a lot bigger than I thought it would be. But very quickly, the key one is cause. So the first C is cause. There must be some attraction or some energizing factor that causes people to come together. You can't just have a very kind of vague community. So it is about thinking about frictional performance needs or something which becomes the nucleus. Then the second one for me was for culture. There very much is a strong need for psychological safety, for inclusivity, to think about us addressing our biases and acting altruistically. So we need to think about how we support great culture. Conditions was the third one. We now know that, exactly as you've said, that people are very dispersed. So it is about creating the right conditions and environments where people can connect and work together. That could be face-to-face, digital, hybrid, metaverse, whatever that might be. The next one was cadence, which is really interesting. This is really important. So cadence is about rhythm. And you find most communities that work well will have some rhythm, whether that be a sports community or a faith community. So what I found was that whether it be synchronous or asynchronous activities, there's some sense of the community knows the rhythm which underpins its work. Then the last one's a content. We need to think about curated assets and putting great information into the community to keep it at the cutting edge. We need to think about contributions. How do we help people to move from being passive to active? And there's some really great ways we can do that through working out loud or whatever. And the last C for me was credit. Lots of communities have really done well because they recognize and value the contributions. Some have even digital badges, or they have particular roles. So for me, those 7 C's, if you want the tips, that was the framework I found, and it's highly practical. So if you do get the book, there are tons of practical tips in there as to how you can make these 7 C's really work for you.
Yeah, come alive in context. So let's go through them. The first one is cause, then culture, then condition, cadence, cadence, contribution, and credit.
Now, you don't have to have all of those necessarily, but what I found was, I guess what I was trying to do is, how do we reverse engineer often the communities that have just sprung up, and brilliant when they do, and we just need to encourage them and not over control those. But in reverse engineering, you actually find the communities which are thriving really well have worked out why they meet. They've got a great open culture. They've got the great infrastructure around them. They've got a rhythm. They are sharing information. They are all actively involved, and they also value each other. So that was my reverse engineering. That if you want to think about how do you work with an organization to encourage and design communities, those are really important factors in the process.
They certainly are. And you can also see there's holistic benefits. So it's not just that there'll be specific knowledge in a particular area. You're actually changing the way people relate to each other across the organization as a whole. And that's very, very important.
Yeah, and I found it's really interesting. A very quick case of that. In one organization, I was working in one large housing organization. We ran a management development program, which is very good, but we took an hour for lunch. And I used to sort of think initially, the hour is a bit of an inconvenience. We need to feed the folks and whatever. We found during lunch that they were solving problems. And it was just brilliant. And we actually increased lunch from 60 minutes to 90 minutes because a lot of the stuff, the powerful stuff, was happening as they sat and ate together.
In the lunch. In the community.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So food and drink is just so important in empowering these things.
Yes, it is. And connection. I think connection is the biggest C of all, really.
Yeah.
That's what you're
Very
trying
good.
to do.
Yeah.
Andy, this is a great talk. I think it's a very, very interesting topic. My belief, personally, is that this will grow and grow and grow. We're moving into an area where we can't rely on individual genius. We have to work collectively much more to speed up insight, to share insight, and to build off each other. So we'll put a crawl on the screen. So if you go explore the book, It's very, very interesting. And Andy, it's such a pleasure talking to you. And thank you for delivering such a convincing case for learning communities.
Thanks, Nigel. And I think in a world of increasing AI, hey, let's not forget the human connection is so important.
Indeed. That's absolutely right. Good point to end on too. Thank you very much, Andy Lancaster.
Of course, Rob Clark joins us with all of the learning news roundup. There is a lot going on. It feels like there's new products, new roadmaps, new all sorts coming out all over the place. The recent award winners as well from, of course, the LPI's Learning Awards. So suck it up and enjoy.
Sentiment towards AI in L&D has increased worldwide. Don Taylor is here with the results of the Global Sentiment Survey. Those in L&D losing their jobs through redundancy is down slightly in the last year. We have the latest on employment in the sector. 75% of HR leaders are feeling the impact of economic headwinds, and it's HR jobs that are set to feel the pinch. The annual Global Sentiment Survey in L&D has asked what is hot in L&D for over a decade. Thousands of L&D practitioners from all around the world take part. Last year, AI became the hottest topic ever in the survey's history, and we surely know it will remain the hottest topic this year. But is it now even hotter? And what might sentiment towards all of the other important topics tell us about learning practitioners' focus for the year ahead?
The crazy thing is that last year I said, it can't get hotter than this, but it has. Last year, it was at 21.5% on the table, easily the biggest number we've ever had. This year, even bigger. Last year and the year before, AI was on people's radar, but it wasn't on everybody's radar. And the fact that it's gone up in our table shows that more people are starting to realize the impact and the importance of AI. And that in turn tells us that the survey is largely dealing with early adopters and innovators, the people right at one end of the Everett Rogers innovation curve. And so while I think you, I, and probably a lot of people listening to this program would be surprised if anybody hadn't heard of AI or took it seriously, the reality is that it's still the case for a lot of people out there that it's a surprising thing. And I'm not going to make any predictions, but who knows what will happen next year? It might go up even further.
Redundancies in learning and development were down slightly over the last 12 months at 11% compared to 15% the year before. Resignations are down. Fewer people are leaving their role voluntarily. And promotions are up. Many more people were promoted in the last year.
Promotions are up, which is very positive news, 21% versus 11% in the previous year, and redundancies are down 11% versus 15% in the previous year. Now, promotions being up, one could take as a very positive output, but you could also look at it in a slightly different way. If a lot of people, and it is a sizable number, are being promoted, that could suggest that actually learning and development functions are somewhat contracting. You might lose some team members and then other people need to be promoted, perhaps taking on additional responsibilities, and that may come with a promotion or a pay rise, right? What we're also seeing is that the amount of people that have been made redundant, although reducing, is still quite significant. 11% of a learning and development function is quite a sizable number, whichever way you look at it. Less people are resigning and taking other jobs. More people are looking to stay at their organisations longer. And again, that feeds into that macroeconomic situation that probably explains a lot of that data.
The Learning and Performance Institute and Microsoft are announcing a strategic global partnership to advance innovation and excellence in learning and development.
We both share a goal to really make learning work. We want to drive productivity, we want to drive efficiency, but both organizations firmly believe that learning has a critical intrinsic role to play in doing that. Obviously, probably now more than ever, certainly in my life, the role of AI is going to be an unprecedented impact, if it isn't already, on how we actually learn and consume information. So for our members and for us as a global body for learning, we want to work with the best and provide the best information, resources, skills, events, consultancy that we can. This partnership will allow us to do that.
Look, I'm so excited about the partnership with LPI because ultimately we're always trying to find the best listening mechanisms to understand like how we get better, like an outside-in approach. And our partnership is going to really be able to scale our ability to understand the best practice in the marketplace. And of course, our mission is to empower every person, every organization on the planet to achieve more. And so we're going to pay it forward by helping organizations that partner with Microsoft to also realize that type of momentum.
Economic headwinds are continuing to affect HR budgets. 75% of HR professionals report the economy has put their HR budget under pressure, and there seems little immediate prospect of that changing. The need to do more with less, or the same, is entrenched in today's HR team.
When we ask people about how they expect reinvestment in HR to increase or decrease, the big areas where they're looking to decrease are the use of external consultants and overall headcount for HR. And those are the sort of ones that really stand out, because when you think about the swing, the negative versus the positive, it's those that show the biggest negative swing. So there's almost this sense that we're reining on the consultants, we're reining in on HR headcount, we're expecting to do more with less. And actually the growth areas, and there's two areas of significant growth, are around HR technology and developing HR expertise. Those are the two things that really stand out from the chart overall. So there's a real push to enriching and enabling maybe a higher performing HR team. But that's potentially a smaller team that's doing more, because when you ask people how many are going to increase their HR headcount spend, only 18% say that. When you ask them how many are going to decrease, 34%. Maybe those people who are remaining are having to do more with technology with a higher level of expertise than we've had in the past.
And that's Learning News this February. Before I hand you back to Kate and Nigel, I'll leave you with a few of the winners from this year's Learning Awards.
Welcome to another of our interviews with our wonderful people from the Charity Learning Consortium. We're so excited this year to interview all of our award winners. And of course, they have award-winning stories to share with you here on Learning Now TV. Our first one for 2025 is Liam Maguire. I'll leave Liam to introduce himself in a moment, but what I am particularly excited about is when we hear from our award winners, the joy of being able to share their stories with you means that I can translate those stories into the world of the corporate and you'll be able to pull things out of them. So Liam, do you want to just tell us a little bit about who you are and what does your organisation do?
Thanks, Michelle. My name's Liam Maguire, and I am the volunteering officer at Christian Aid. Christian Aid is an international NGO that focuses on eradicating the scandal of extreme poverty. And within my role, I work in the volunteering team supporting over 8,000 of our wonderful volunteers who support every element of our work.
Excellent. So for our listeners overseas, NGO?
An international aid organization.
Okay, so those non-governmental organizations that, like you, are working across the globe, not just in one location. And so are you responsible for the UK or for a wider setting?
So fortunately, I'm only responsible for UK volunteers, which is plenty enough to keep me busy.
8,000. Fantastic. So what's the work that caused Charity Learning Consortium to recognise you and give you one of their awards?
So as part of my role within the volunteering team, I look after learning and development for volunteers and volunteer managers. And so that's what brought us into Charity Learning Consortium's sort of orbit, if you like. And through Charity Learning Consortium, I was attending their conferences and supporting some of their other members with sort of how to, I guess, tailor training to a volunteer audience. And they were very kind to recognize me and award me the Community Champion Award.
So the Charity Learning Consortium awarded you the Community Champion Award. And obviously, I'm keen to hear a little bit more about what is it that you do in terms of learning and development and communities?
Sure. So Christian Aid as an organization, I guess this is true of many charities, is absolutely dependent on our sort of wonderful volunteers in order to amplify our message and help us to raise like essential funds. And so Christian Aid does that in a number of ways. Through community fundraisers is the bulk of our sort of volunteer base. But then within that, we have this core of I guess, more specialized volunteers, for want of a better way of putting it, that require a little bit more extra support. And part of that is they require training, either about their role or compliance or those kind of elements. And so I was very keen to learn from other members of the Charity Learning Consortium about how they're using their platform, what best practices we could take to apply to our volunteers, but also recognizing that volunteers are a slightly different audience in terms of learning and development. So they maybe don't have the same preferences and motivations that maybe like an employed member of an organization or somebody in the corporate sector might have. So they're not necessarily engaging with learning and development to build their skills for a future career, because many of them might already be retired. There's not the same sort of ability to kind of strongly encourage through like management systems and things like that, people to take up training in the same way, because ultimately you're working with volunteers. And so you're having to find more intrinsic motivations. Although I'm sure no organization would want to do this, if you absolutely had to, you could email a member of staff and say, you haven't done your compliance training, you need to complete it.
Yeah,
you can't do that with volunteers.
No. I mean, people who are volunteering are ultimately giving because they choose to give. And when you're asking them to complete learning and development, you're asking them to give even more of themselves. So how have you used sort of the community-based, or how have you actually encouraged people to do the training? Because this is a problem that we have in the corporate space, that, people don't care about learning and development, except if you work in the learning and development team. So how do we give people that intrinsic motivation?
Yeah, I think the most important lesson that we have learned is that you have to connect the training to something that your volunteer also cares about. So you have to work twice as hard to help them see the benefit of investing their time, which with things like safeguarding training or code of conduct can be really, really hard, because especially many people who volunteer often volunteer with other charities as well, and so may have already done very similar training on things like data protection and safeguarding and things like that. And so you have to work really hard to help them see how this training is not just about ticking a corporate box, but is actually about helping them to do their role more effectively, to be more confident, to help keep themselves and others safe. That ultimately you're doing it because you care about them, about the work that they're doing, and you want to see them succeed in that.
And when you've interacted with your community of peers, which you get from the Charity Learning Consortium, how has that helped you personally to grow as well and to be motivated? Because we all, when we work in learning and development, we also need that intrinsic motivation. We all need to be part of something and to grow ourselves. What's helped you there?
I think just learning from other people's experience and expertise. Like, I'll be really honest with you, our journey into learning and development as a team began 3 years ago when we started looking for a learning management system. And that's when my journey into learning and development really started properly as well. Before that, I wasn't doing as much. And so I really recognized that, I don't have all the answers. I don't, sort of 3 years ago, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so being able to be part of a community where I can ask other people to, their advice on questions, where I can view their sort of learning management systems, where I can get an idea of the challenges that they faced and how they've overcome them, has been absolutely essential for me. And just that recognition that we often it can feel like you're in your own little sort of charity silo, and to be able to break out of that and sort of say, well, what are you doing that's worked for you? And this is what I've done that's worked for me, has been really, really valuable.
Liam, there's so many connections here that often if you're working in L&D in a corporate space, you might be the only person in L&D, even in a global role, for example. So building your network, as you've shared with us today, both helps your motivation, but also enables you to share with others. I am loving the humility that you have and that you've shared with us, and I appreciate it very much, because you're encouraging us all to connect with each other, and that can only be a good thing. So I'm all for connection, community, building your personal learning network, and I appreciate you be part of ours today here on Learning Now TV. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
For February's Learning Now TV, we've brought back the famous Martin Cousins slot. We haven't done this for a couple of months, and I'm sure that people are missing the chance to review a good report. And we've got a good report. So, Martin, what are we talking about today?
Well, you probably won't be too surprised that we're talking about artificial intelligence, Nigel. But there's a great report from LinkedIn called the Work Change Report. AI is coming to work. So I'm just looking at my notes. It was published in January, and it takes a lot of data from LinkedIn members. So it kind of scrapes data from the platform, but it also, towards the end of last year, did a global bit of research of 2,500 organizations and how they're using Gen AI. So it's a kind of, it's a decent sized bit of research, and it's quite interesting because it kind of tells a story, I think, of rapid skills change. it's about AI, but actually they're looking back at some of their data points to suggest that, what the skills that people are looking for and are kind of developing are changing quite rapidly and have been doing so over the last few years. And that's continued to, I know that the World Economic Forum and organizations like that put in data points around skills change. This one, in this report, they're saying by 2030, 70% of the skills used in most jobs will change, and AI will be the catalyst for that. So that's only a few years away. So if that's anywhere near true and comes to pass, then you can see that we're in this period where there's going to be quite a lot of acceleration of different types of skills.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely clear, and they're completely unambiguous in it. They're also saying that yes, there's a cost. This is tough and difficult, but if you embrace it, they're saying that those companies that adopted generative AI reported a revenue increase of 10% or more, and 88% of C-suite leaders say it's helping their business speed up and do better, essentially, and that AI adoption is important. So it is stating the obvious, but it's stating the obvious with one huge database to substantiate what they're saying. Yeah, I think this is very, very interesting, and it's basically saying it's like AI is now almost just part of the work climate. It's part of the work environment. You either move forward fast or you move forward slowly, up to you, but you got to move forward. Is that a fair interpretation?
Yeah, and I think also when you've got, and this report is not the only report that's focusing a lot more on what the C-suite is thinking about Gen AI. That has really emerged across a lot of research that tends to touch learning, but it's certainly touching a lot more of the learning-related reports, actually. So in this one, 88% of C-suite leaders say speeding up AI adoption is important over the next year. So that is basically, to your point, there is a huge focus on that. And it's being used for innovation and creativity, and also its efficiencies, it's time and cost saving. So that's the agenda. That is what the leadership teams of organizations are focusing on. And I think that's where learning needs to play at a very base level. It's like, how can the entire workforce have the confidence in these tools to know how to use them, and the potential for how they can be used to, develop and transform the way they work. I think, that seems to me like an invitation from the C-suite right now. A, we want to get there. B, someone in this organization needs to help us get there. And that someone or group of people seems to me to be the learning team.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And just some of the statistics saying that 75% of global knowledge professionals now utilize Gen AI at work, and half adopting it over the last year. So this is massive, a shift in focus. And, it's so general now, chatting to people using Gen AI. It's hard to meet people who haven't used it at work. And all of them are saying it's really helpful. It speeds things up, takes away the grunt work. Couldn't manage without it now. So this is a big, big shift. But as I keep saying, and you keep saying, having an individual use their own little pet system like ChatGPT or whatever it might be, Copilot, is very different from the whole workforce and the whole of work being informed and empowered by AI. And that's why, if you look at the number one new jobs, demand for jobs, artificial intelligence engineer is the first in Netherlands, Singapore, UK, and US. And that's because that artificial intelligence engineer doesn't spend his or her time saying, oh, this is how you use Copilot. That person is embedding AI into the workflow. And that, I think, is extraordinarily powerful and interesting. That's the big change. I think that's what we're going to see this year, is more integrated workflow engineering based around AI rather than individuals finding it quite helpful, or no, it's not quite helpful, very helpful, very useful. So the world is changing, Martin, and this report kind of underlines that, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, one might look at it and say, well, that's not happening in our organization. But in aggregate, if it's a massive platform, LinkedIn. So one thing it does offer us is a view of what the data is telling us. And so suddenly, it's interesting, there's been a 140% increase in the pace at which LinkedIn members add new skills to their profile since 2022. So, basically, there's a momentum here. And that's something that, whether it's happening in our organizations or not right now, or you're not seeing much evidence of it, I think it's worth engaging with the bigger picture, which is, platforms like LinkedIn are the place where people are updating their skills, and this change is happening in front of our very eyes. So, yes, I think it's a useful report for signalling, the direction of travel, which we are aware of. But I think it's direction of travel, and it's speeding up. The pace at which we're getting to where we're going is quicker than we otherwise may have thought in previous shifts.
So what you're saying is that this report underlines what we know and gives some huge data to back up this, that the ground is moving beneath our feet, and woe betide us if we try and imagine that that's not happening, or we don't need to worry about this stuff. We really do. Data's all there. Martin, thank you. It's so easy to read, 33-page report, and everyone should have it on their desk. And you don't need to spend hours and hours poring over it to get the main message. It's absolutely clear and unambiguous. Martin, thank you very much indeed. Always good to talk.
Great. Thanks, Nigel.
Well, that's the end of another Learning Now television program, and we will see you again in 1 month's time. Kate, what did you like best? What was interesting? No, I don't want you to say who you like best. What was the most interesting, and what would you like to highlight?
Yeah, it's like being a mother, isn't it? You can't pick your favourite child. I loved talking to Ash about the AI kind of situation, and I like the fact that he comes at it from, he's looking ahead, but he lives in the here and now. And I think that's where a lot of people are. It's like, okay, I'm here, I want to experiment. How do I do that safely? How do I teach myself before I can teach others? I think that's something that we put a lot on ourselves in learning and development. We often feel like we need to be expert or at least proficient before we can get started. So I really enjoyed just some of his thinking there. Super excited to read Andy's new book. And then, yeah, keen to hear what you thought about the LinkedIn report that Martin was talking about, actually.
Well, it's a very narrow report. It's focused on one aspect. It's not their big global learning report, which is why I thought it was more interesting. It's focusing on work and the way work is changing. And I think LinkedIn, they've got such a huge database of people to draw upon. They always come up with really accurate and interesting predictions. They never kind of set the world on fire by, wow, that's a revelation, but it's solid stuff, and it's well worth reading. It's 33 pages, and I would recommend people have a look at it. We list it. You'll see the link in the program. Just go back, and if you missed it, and get that and download it. I also think that Andy and we chatted about the value of learning communities. Now, it's a big part of my book on organizational learning. It's about joining people together and working together on problems. So I think this idea, which has received very little attention recently, is now coming into its own. And I've talked to many, many organizations. They're all saying, we need to connect people. We need people to come together. We need to work together on problem, all of that stuff. Bang on, Andy.
Do you think it relates to the sort of challenge of, there's been a lot of talk over the years around high performing teams, but I don't actually see a lot of that community collaboration building being done super well necessarily. There's often cohorts and things like onboarding, but it often doesn't translate out of that, I think.
You're 100% right. See, they say we're all about high-performing teams, but here are your individual KPIs. These are your targets. This is what your bonus will be based on. There's this massive contradiction at the heart of organizations. So essentially, we really value your team contribution, but on the other hand, we're only going to pay you based on what your individual contribution is. So there's a whole cultural area to explore. And that's what I'm saying is that in the book is that it's not just an L&D issue. It's not just about sticking teams into organizations. They exist already. It's building a culture that values that kind of cooperation. And that is more challenging. So I think it's a big area that's going to keep bouncing along for a while to come, particularly in the face of the kind of changes everyone's facing. You need everyone to kind of pull together to get stuff done and to get the right solutions to the kind of challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, and how do we harness AI from a collaborative perspective?
Absolutely.
You know, that it feels like that's not something that we've properly fully explored yet either.
No, it's all true. So Tom, what have we got coming on? We mentioned them all last month.
It's a busy old time of year. I mean, Mr. Graham is cross with me because I keep packing my bags, so I have to go places. So we've got learning technologies is sort of co-situated with HR technologies on the 23rd and 24th of April at London Excel. Even if you can't get to London for that, we know there'll be a ton of good outputs from that. Then we're through to the CIPD Festival of Work, which is the 11th and 12th of June. And then actually the next couple of things I've got on my list are later in the year. So Learning Live, 17th and 18th of September. And then the Learning 2025 event is the 1st to the 3rd of October in Florida. But there are definitely some other sort of more local events happening, certainly between now and the summer. So stay tuned for those.
Yeah, we'll keep you informed about those as they pop up. But it's a trajectory across the year, okay? And our next program is on the 27th of March. So don't miss it. Thanks very much again. Always good to talk to you.
See you soon when the daffodils and the spring and the sun is out.
Indeed. Let's hope. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Thanks a lot.